Hello everybody. The purpose of this short video is to brief you on the MGM assignment, the Managing Global Marketing assignment, which needs to be submitted in December 2020. So in this video, I will focus on the common pitfalls that students usually make when they submit their assignments. And let's go into more detail into the two tasks, the maximum word count related to each task, and the theory area, the subject knowledge that you need to bring in to complete this assignment. So let's move on with certain common pitfalls that many assignment markers face when marking assignments. Now, we all know that there are guidelines given, assignment guidelines given in your handbook. When you get your assignment, the first thing that you need to do is to read the guidelines and understand how the submission has to be done. So something common that we see in many students is not following these assignment guidelines. Slim has gone into detail to tell you the font, the font size, margins that you need to keep, spacing, Harvard referencing. There are many details given in your assignment itself, plus the handbook. So please go through them, and even the pages that you need to include. If you look at the cover page, after the cover page, there are instructions given as to how the marking sheets need to be attached, right? So sometimes we see assignments without the mark sheet. So don't make these mistakes. Go through the guidelines given, have the checklist ready, mark on the checklist and see whether you have submitted everything in order. So this is something common that many assignment markers see, that is not following assignment guidelines. Then number two, poor referencing. Usually when you come to the postgraduate diploma level, the third stage, this is an area that examiners do not tolerate. Referencing is important, and the fact that you follow Harvard referencing is very, very important. So if you don't know how to do this, reach out. There are presentations done as to how Harvard referencing can be used. We can help you out with all that, and I know for a fact that Slim has arranged few sessions too on Harvard referencing in particular. And of course, a third point is poor preparation and late submission. That is why Slim has given you a time period to do the submission without a deadline, because usually what happens is when you give a deadline, everybody, come and submit on the deadline. And something common that I have seen in many of these assignments, which has that late submission seal on it, those are poorly done, right? Because you always feel that it's a last minute job. Within 2-3 days, you're trying to attempt it and completing it, right? So poor preparation and late submission are two things that you can easily avoid. Given the current circumstances, you have enough free time now. Most of you might be working from home, so use time wisely and prepare for the assignment. That is the whole reason, the purpose of putting out this video also, so that we give you time to prepare for the assignment. And sometimes we see situations where all tasks are not completed, or is less emphasis given on certain tasks. Say if the assignment has 3 tasks, students give more emphasis on task 1 and 2, but less emphasis on task 3, or else completely forget to address the third task. So this is also a common pitfall. So read through the assignment, make sure that you address all the tasks in the assignment. Word count wasted unnecessarily, especially in the MGM assignment. Sometimes when you're asked to talk about a particular country, you can see details which are not necessary, or else you talk about a company which is already there in the case study, which does not need an introduction. Remember the context of the report. If the report is submitted to the managing director of the company, the managing director does not want to know a company overview. Company overview is understood, right? Because you are presenting to the managing director. When the context is that, still you sometimes see students writing lengthy company overviews which are not required, right? So be mindful when you use your word count. You don't have much words. Word count is a scarce resource that you have, so use it wisely. And not using appendices to bring in additional reading, again a common pitfall. When word count is a limitation, you have to use appendix to bring in important insights that you want to share. So bringing it under appendix won't do any good if you don't refer to the appendix on the main body. So make sure if you're bringing any points under appendix to refer to appendix on your main text or on your main body. So these are few things that I wanted to highlight before we start the assignment briefing. So I have two examples here. Look at the first example with a red cross here. I will point to it using the laser pointer. This is not the way you do your referencing, right? This is not Harvard referencing. This is not at all acceptable. And this was done by an MGM student of stage 3, right? So I thought I'll bring this example. You will not gain marks for referencing like this, right? And here I have a good example. Now this is a bad assignment, but look at this assignment on the right hand side. This is not an MGM assignment, but a different assignment. Look at the format, right? The format required in this instance was a briefing paper. So you can see the briefing paper format being adhered to by the student. And just see how the answer is organized, right? There are very clear subheadings. Those subheadings are numbered. If you refer to the images, the images are numbered and there is a title and the source is available. So this is how a professional assignment, a stage 3 level assignment has to be submitted, right? So identify the key areas of the assignment, have them as subheadings, and organize your answer, organize your content under those subheadings. These are some important tips that I can give you. And in the assignment briefing today, I will show you those key subheadings so that it will make life easier for you to organize your content, right? So let's move on to this assignment, December 2020. Let's try and understand the context. Who are you? You are working for this organization. That is why I have put senior manager. You can be a senior manager in the organization, and your managing director has asked you to do a report on expanding this business to international markets. That's the context. So you can be a senior manager or even a marketing manager for that matter. But whom are you writing this report to? You're writing it to the managing director of the company. What is this organization? This organization is a Sri Lankan spice manufacturer. What do they intend to do? Expand to international markets. Format has to be a report format. And what are the areas that you need to cover under your syllabus? It's mainly international marketing environment. You would have already done political and legal environment, and of course a socio-cultural environment. So that's about it under international marketing environment. And then we can bring in a little bit of economic environment as well into the picture. And then you can focus on the market entry strategies. I'm sure you have still not done market entry strategies, which will be covered in the next couple of sessions. But for the time being, these are the two areas that you need to cover under your assignment. So the deadline for the assignment is 5th and 6th of December. Please make sure that you are prepared to submit your assignment on 5th itself, right? Even before that, because then you will have peace of mind to uh, get prepared with your exams. So this is the context, and if you read through the assignment, there are few areas that are highlighted. This is a spice manufacturer in Sri Lanka, and this organization is moving out. I'm sorry, expanding to international markets. So you will have to select an international market and expand this business. And there are some insights on the assignment given about the current context, about the pandemic, and during the pandemic, how spice products are being highly demanded, especially Sri Lankan spices being highly demanded, and there are connections, various connections saying our food habits, our Sri Lankan food habits might have been an immune booster. As a result, we don't see the disease being spread, but none of it is scientifically proven. But these are stories that we have heard during the last couple of months. And there is a demand for Sri Lankan products like mainly spices like turmeric, then cinnamon, cardamom, moringa powder. Moringa is actually not a spice, but spice related products coming from Sri Lanka, and even for Sri Lankan tea for that matter. Right. So that is the context of this assignment. So you talk about demand in the world market for Sri Lankan spices right now, and how, as a Sri Lankan company, we are going to capitalize this opportunity. Your task one uh, includes an introduction plus a marketing environment analysis, right? So task one has to be 1,750 words, because out of the 3,500 words, you get 50 marks, or 50% of the marks are allocated for task one, and 50% of the marks are allocated for task two. So if you read task one, I will quickly share the assignment with you. Right. So if you go back to the assignment, I will read the task one quickly. Before getting into task one, the context: you are working for a Sri Lankan spice manufacturer who thinks this is the ideal time to expand globally. You are currently exporting the product to a few countries in bulk form without any value addition. Your managing director has requested you to explore opportunities in the value added marketplace. So remember, uh, you are currently a spice manufacturer exporting your product as bulk, right? But the focus is going to be on introducing a value added product to a selected market of your choice. So it can't be just exporting spice in bulk, but you need to do some value addition. You need to do a little bit of research about that market, and bring a product, a value added product, which can be sold in that market. So task one: select a country of your choice to expand the value added product range and analyze the external marketing environment of the selected country. You are expected to provide an overview of the product range and a country overview, which can be followed by an external marketing environment analysis. Start the task with an overview of the value-added product range and a country overview. This can be followed by a political and legal, socio-cultural, economic, and technology environment analysis. So very simple. What you need to do is, before doing a country overview, I go back to the presentation, you need to, sorry, after the country overview, you will have to do a product overview as well, right? So the country overview is going to be about the selected country, right? Say if you have selected Vietnam for an example, or as if you have selected Maldives for an example, if you have selected Japan for an example, an overview of Vietnam, an overview of Japan, an overview of Maldives, right? So this overview should not be a detailed introduction to the country, because you have to anyway talk about the political and legal environment of that country, socio-cultural environment of that country, economic environment, and the technology environment in detail. So don't go into those details. Just talk about the geography, where the country is located, a brief history of the country. Don't take a lot of words, maybe a small paragraph on the country, an overview and introduction to the country. That's more than enough, right? When you talk about the product overview, it can be a product mix. Now, I have given you some examples here. Now, if you are exporting moringa as is, then you become a bulk exporter of moringa. But if you are bringing a product, a value-added product called moringa powder, if you look at this product itself, it talks about different usages of the product. You can make maybe it might be good for a cup of tea. You can add a little bit of moringa powder to your daily cup of tea. You can make a juice out of it. You can use it in your mocktails, for an example, right? So these are the different usages of this product. If you look at this product packaging, on the packaging itself, it talks about the different usages. Now, you don't have to limit it to Sri Lankan spices like turmeric to cinnamon to the traditional spices, but also agri-based products. Just you can reach out to a larger product range, right? Or else you can always stick to the traditional spices and look at value additions coming from those traditional spices too, right? So an example of that is given onto your right hand side, the golden turmeric cereal, right? And if you do a little bit of research, you might realize that there is turmeric flakes, right? Which are fetching a higher price in the international market. Even in Sri Lanka, turmeric is very expensive now. So how can we do those value additions for turmeric? How can you use a cinnamon and do certain value additions with cinnamon, right? So talk about a product range for that particular country, right? So bring about a little bit of creativity at this point. You can talk about say 3 or 4 products that you want to introduce in that market with a little bit of packaging to a little bit of detail about the product, right? Now again, don't overdo it. Maybe 100 words on the product range is more than enough. Bring about say 4 or 5 products, introduce those products with some packaging, that's it, right? Don't overdo it again, because if you look at the most important areas of task 1, those are related to the marketing environment. So you need to now move into the marketing environment in detail. So country overview, maybe 50 words, product overview, maybe 100 words, put a lot of pictures there and introduce your product range. That's it, right? Don't spend more than 200 words on this, right? So let's move on to the most important area, which is the macro environment analysis. So under macro environment, we can start off with the political and legal environment, put both political and legal environments together. Now we have covered political environment in our classes. We said, I have told you that when you talk about the political environment, there are 3 things that matter: political ideology, political stability, and political risk. So if you look at the country that you have chosen, say if you have chosen Singapore for an example. In Singapore, what is the political ideology? What is the political stability, and what is the political risk? Basically, these are the 3 elements that you need to analyze. So how do you look at political ideology? You can talk about the government, the ruling party, the name of the ruling party, key government positions, and the ideology in detail. Is it capitalism? Is it socialism? What's the ideology? Do you see a democracy in that market? Do you see an autocratic system? Likewise, analyze the government ideology and the political ideology, government type and the political ideology. Moving on to political stability and political risk, there are few indicators. There are certain indicators that can be used, right? So what you see here is a link. We call it the Marsh.com Marsh political risk map, right? Where you can go and select your country and analyze the country's political risk, right? So here, if you look at Myanmar, there is a country risk index. According to the country risk index, Myanmar falls into a more risky political environment. So you can use this app or else this website to assess the country risk of the selected country. And then, of course, the political stability also, there is a link given here. You can go through this link and see the political stability of your selected country. Now, if you go through the list, you might realize that Monaco, countries like Monaco, New Zealand, Singapore, has political stability as opposed to markets like Brazil, for an example, markets like Colombia, for an example. Political stability is quite high in markets like Singapore, in markets like New Zealand. So these are good insights that you can bring in to your assignment when you talk about the political risk and the political stability. So I will share these presentations with you so that you can access these links. Then moving back, so under political, we are talking about the political ideology, stability and risk. You can go into those risk index or stability indexes and bring insights, and then talk about the legal environment. So when you talk about the legal environment, again, we learned different types of law: common law countries, code law countries, Islamic law countries, socialist law countries. So at this stage, analyze the type of law in the country that you have selected, and also ease of doing business. I will come to ease of doing business later under legal environment, and also regulations related to the industry, right? So if you do a basic analysis about the legal environment, you will realize that legal environment is something that you can analyze in broad, right? You don't have to relate it to a particular industry. Type of law, you can talk about type of law without relating it to any industry. Ease of doing business. Ease of doing business is an index published by the World Bank, which talks about how bureaucratic the laws and processes are, or how easy it is to do business, establish business and work in a particular country. So if there are many bureaucratic red tape laws that does not allow you to do business easily, right? Then we always say ease of doing business is low, right? The ranking is very low. But when you improve your ease of doing business, that is an indicator that you have flexibility in the process, easily start a business, you can obtain certain approvals without any issues, right? So that is why under legal environment, we are looking at ease of doing business. Now, type of law and ease of doing business, you don't have to relate it to an industry. You can broadly talk about the country's type of law and the ease of doing business ranking, right? But it is also important for you to analyze any regulations related to this industry, food and spices. Now you might be wondering why I have included food industry. Spices industry, for sure, you can analyze any regulations related to spices, right? Spice industry. Are there any duties that you need to pay? Are there any specific regulations, specific approvals that you need to obtain? That is very clear. But you might have realized that when I gave you the example of moringa powder, it might be related to the food industry too. So it's not just the spice industry, but because this is a value added product, you might be appealing to the food industry as well. So any regulations related to food industry or spice industry, any approvals that you need to obtain, any particular duty structures that you need to follow, is something that you will have to suggest at this stage, right? Analyze at this stage. So going into ease of doing business, you can go into their website, World Bank website, doingbusiness.org, and then select the country. It'll give you the overall rank plus ranks in other dimensions like starting a business. If you look at this ranking here, ease of doing business rank, the first column is the general overall ranking, but then this overall ranking comes from different sub ranks. Starting a business, is it easy to start a business or is it difficult to start a business? Is it easy to deal with construction permits? Difficult to deal with construction permits. Is it easy to get electricity? Difficult to get electricity. So this is a very simple index where you can identify where the selected country stands based on ease of doing business. Now, so here I'm giving you an example of such industry specific regulations, right? Now, this insight is coming from Malaysia. These are the main industries where restrictions are still imposed on foreign equity holding, right? So in these industries, foreign companies can't hold 100% ownership, right? So there are equity limitations for foreign companies in these industries. Look at those industries: financial services, capital market services, insurance, petroleum, communications, wholesale and distributive trade, education services, freight forwarding and shipping, water. So these are some of these industries where foreign equity holding is limited, right? So moving on, another example would be from hypermarkets, right? In hypermarkets, the equity structure is at least 30% equity has to be held by Bhumiputras. So Bhumiputras are locals, right? Local Malaysians. So the majority, you can go up to 70% equity by a foreign company, but only 30%, at least 30% should be held by a local Bhumiputra. So these are industry specific regulations. So likewise, now this is for retail, but if you do research, you might identify certain restrictions, regulations related to food imports into the country, or else spice imports into the country. If you want to have 100% ownership of a company, are there any restrictions of owning 100%? So these are industry related, industry specific regulations that you will have to study, right? So going back, once again, we have the political environment where we discuss about the political ideology, and then political stability and political risk. I gave you websites as to where you can find this information. And then the legal environment, broadly, you talk about type of law, ease of doing business, and more specifically talk about regulations on your industry, which is related to food and spices, right? If I give you more examples, I have explained this in class. Food and Drug Authority approval. If you are exporting food related items to US, you need to obtain FDA approval. So likewise, when you import food related items, spices, there has to be different regulations that are governing those industries in those countries. So you will have to go into a detailed study on those. Then moving on to the economic environment, very simply talk about the GDP per capita, inflation, and also if you have data about the middle class, right? How big is the middle class? Is there a growth in the middle class? Talk about those, right? Why I want you to discuss about the middle class is most of these value added spices and value added food is bought by the middle class and the upper middle classes and the upper classes. The reason behind that is their lifestyles. They lead a very time pressure lifestyle. So they always look for convenience, right? So if you can provide these spices or any food item with a value added form, it makes life easier, especially for this middle class, right? So that is why you need to keep in mind that your target audience will fall into a upper middle class kind of segment. So do a little bit of analysis about their buying power, how big is the middle class. These are few areas that you might have to research under the economic environment. And again, under economic environment, specific tariffs on products. If you are planning to probably export these spices from Sri Lanka to Vietnam, or else from Sri Lanka to Singapore, what are the tariffs you might have to pay in Singapore is something that you will have to um, um, talk about under the economic environment. So moving on to the socio-cultural environment, I think in class we discussed the components of culture. Right? We learned more than 3 or 4 components of culture. We learned about language, we learned about religion, we learned about values and attitudes, education, social organization. So we learned many components of culture, right? So here, for this assignment, select about 3 to 4 components which are important and relate it to the country that you have chosen. If you have selected Singapore, what's the main language? What are the other languages spoken? What are the religious beliefs? What are the religions that they follow? Based on the religion, are there any days which are important, right? Days which are celebrated in those countries, right? Then what organization like? Is it extended family? Is it a living together kind of social organization? So you will have to analyze this, select about 3 or 4 components of culture. Don't pick 5 components of culture because then it'll eat into your word count. Take maximum of 3 components of culture and do a detailed analysis relating it to the country that you have chosen, right? And then Hofstede's cultural dimensions, very important, right? Do an analysis on Hofstede's cultural dimensions. I did this in class. You can go on to Google, type Hofstede's cultural dimensions, compare countries. Then you will land on a page where you have the option of selecting a country and doing the Hofstede's cultural analysis, right? So when you do this, make sure that you compare your selected country with Sri Lanka, because this is a spice manufacturer based out of Sri Lanka. So if you're going to Vietnam, you should be able to do a comparison between Sri Lanka and Vietnam on the Hofstede's dimensions. What is the power distance of Sri Lanka? What is the power distance of Vietnam? What is the masculinity ranking in Sri Lanka? What is the masculinity ranking in Vietnam? Do a comparison which will be helpful in identifying the challenges, the cultural challenges that you will have to face in that market. So under socio-cultural environment, discuss 3 or 4 components, 3 components maximum, right? Related to the country that you have chosen. And Hofstede's cultural dimensions, bring in a comparison between Sri Lanka and the country that you have selected. And maybe as a concluding paragraph, you can put certain cultural challenges or opportunities that you will face based on this cultural analysis, right? So in a nutshell, this is what you need to do under task 1. And if the word count permits, include a little note on the technology environment where you bring in some data, right? Just bring in some infographics and show that this is the technology environment landscape in the country that you have chosen. what's the internet penetration in the country, how many social media users, how many users have computers, out of the population, what is a percentage that has computers, right? Who has access to internet, right? The percentage who has access to social media, how many mobile phone devices are being used in the country. So just an insight about the technology environment landscape will also be helpful depending on the word count availability that you have, right? So to complete this task, political and legal, socio-cultural, economic environment, and a technology landscape might be important, right? So then we move on to task two, right? Sorry about this, it has to be task two. So let's, I'll go back to the task. Right, here we go. So moving on to task two, when entering to the selected market, the organization has few entry options available. Discuss three entry strategies suitable for the organization and discuss advantages and disadvantages of each of these strategies. Thereafter, select one strategy which is the most appropriate for your organization. Provide a strong justification for your selection. Guidelines. First part of this task requests you to discuss advantages and disadvantages of three entry methods. You will have to consider various elements such as government regulations, competitors' entry strategy, etc. when justifying the most suitable entry strategy. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. Now here, what is expected from you is to analyze the entry strategy, right, of your chosen company, right? Now here, this is an area that we have not covered in class yet, but when you discuss the theory area related to entry strategies, you will be able to relate to the assignment. But I will give you an overview right now so that you have a basic idea, right? So there are many entry strategies available, right? Out of all these entry strategies, you are supposed to select three entry strategies and explain these entry strategies. So if you look at the entry strategies that are available in your book, if you do a reading, you will understand the different entry options available, and I will do a separate session on market entry strategies later. There are various options that are available. You can decide to manufacture in Sri Lanka and export to another country, right? When you do that, you can probably have two options where you directly export to the end consumer, or else you export through a distributor or an agent, right? You appoint a distributor or an agent and then export. Or else you can look at manufacturing options abroad. You can give it out to a contract manufacturer, right? And ask that contract manufacturer to manufacture on behalf of you. That can be an alternative. Or else you can give a license, right? I'm just saying, right? Ask another party to manufacture on behalf of you and pay you a royalty and sell it in that market and pay you a royalty. Or else you can acquire a company in overseas country, right? You call it acquisition, or else get into a joint venture with another company that is established in another country. So these are the alternatives. There are various alternatives that are available that you can pick and choose from. But always remember the context. You are a spice manufacturer, right? When you are a spice manufacturer in Sri Lanka, the biggest advantage that you have is your product is coming from Sri Lanka. It's manufactured in Sri Lanka. So you will have to keep this also in mind when you're suggesting certain entry strategies, right? So why I said that was if you are exporting this product to another market, obviously that market will buy your product because it is manufactured in Sri Lanka. But if you manufacture this product in another market, you might not have the country of origin effect, the positive country of origin effect, uh, to go out and say, look, this product is manufactured in Sri Lanka, right? However, if you look at the case study, in the case study or the assignment, it says the Indian government is giving concessions to manufacturers who want to get into spice manufacturing. Now, in a situation like that, manufacturing in that country might be the best alternative available. So the entry strategies that you bring to the table depends on the country that you choose, right? So please keep that in mind when you select an entry method, right? And be practical when you suggest your entry strategies as well. If I give you an example, getting into a joint venture might be ideal. If you want to get into a market and if you want to establish in that market, you can suggest joint ventures. But if you suggest acquisition as an entry strategy, you have to be an established firm, right? So keep that in mind when you suggest an entry strategy. Another example, if you say I want to give license, or if I want to get into a franchising agreement, you should have an established brand. Now we will learn under entry strategies. Disney. What is Disney doing? Disney has a strong brand. They give this brand as license to Rainco in Sri Lanka and ask Rainco to manufacture umbrellas with the Disney branding, right? And Rainco has to sell these umbrellas and pay a royalty fee back to Disney, right? And then the same company, Disney, gives license to DSI to manufacture shoes with the Disney logo, right? But DSI has to pay a royalty fee back to Disney, right? So Disney can afford to do this because they have a strong brand. Do you think the company that you are working for has that strong brand? Because all this time they have been basically selling spices in bulk form. So they might not be having a strong brand where they can give as franchise, right? Or as license. So keep these in mind when you come up with these entry strategies. So you might have to start small, right? In your entry strategies too, you might have to start small because your company is just into bulk exporting and all that right now. So they might not have the capability of getting into different high involvement entry strategies, right? So all what you got to do is don't think so far, just explain three entry methods, three entry strategies. Explain the advantages and disadvantages of the entry strategy, right? So few advantages and few disadvantages. If I give you an example, if you export, the biggest advantage that you get is economies of scale, right? What is a disadvantage? Disadvantage would be you will have to pay duty on the landed cost of that product, because you're exporting a product. Obviously, you will have to pay a duty. But if you manufacture in that country, you don't have to pay duty. That becomes an advantage, right? So likewise, depending on the entry strategies, the three entry strategies discuss the advantages and disadvantages. If you look at a joint venture, the biggest advantage is you can share the risk and you can bring in the local know-how through a local partner. But what is the biggest disadvantage? The biggest disadvantage in joint ventures would be the time taken for decision making, because you have two parties, different interests. So decision making and controls are going to be difficult. So likewise, explain the advantages and disadvantages of the three entry strategies that you bring to the table, right? When you do this, discuss about competitors who have used these entry strategies in the selected market. If you can do a little bit of study on competitors in the country that you have chosen, right? Um, uh, Case studies of competitors or similar companies, how they have entered the country that you have chosen, right? It's ideal if you can identify few spice or food companies that are in the country that you have chosen and how they have entered the market. So ideally, you will have to pick some foreign companies which are present in the country that you have chosen and just study how they have entered this market, right? So when you do this study, it might be helpful in selecting the three entry strategies as well, right? So if you can look at the competitors, how they have entered, it will give you a good understanding of the most relevant entry strategies that you can discuss in your assignment, right? So I would suggest when you start task 2, first do a competitor study and see how they have entered and then come up with the entry strategies that you're going to suggest. Now, the most important part of this task is the justification of a selected entry method. Now, you out of these three entry strategies, you have to select an entry method and you need to justify it, right? Now, justification should include the following. Number one, legal implications for selecting the entry method. Sometimes the reason why you're selecting joint ventures as an entry strategy could be due to the government regulation. Government says no foreign company can have 100% ownership, right? In a situation like that, you have no option but to select a joint venture partner, right? Or else if you decide to export, the reason why you export from Sri Lanka to the country that you have chosen might be due to a free trade agreement that has been signed between the two countries so that you don't have to pay tariffs when it lands in the country that you have chosen, right? Say Sri Lanka and India has a trade agreement. Due to the trade agreement, you decide to export the product to India because there won't be any tariffs, right? So likewise, what is the legal implication for selecting this entry method can be used to justify the selected entry method. Another justification could be culture, right? Sometimes when you look at the Hofstede's cultural dimensions, if you see the country's culture, the selected country's culture is very different to your home country's culture. Ideally, you can go with a joint venture, right? Or else select a partner in the overseas market because you don't know the culture. Culture is very different to the Sri Lankan culture. So maybe due to cultural implications, you might select an entry method like joint ventures, or else you might select an entry method such as um, going through a distributor, right? Because of this cultural implication, you don't have know-how about the country, so you always prefer to go through an intermediary rather than going direct into that market. And then another factor can be other factors such as nature of business. Remember, you're a spice manufacturer, a Sri Lankan spice manufacturer, and if your key competitive advantage is Ceylon spice, right? If it is the country of origin that you are going to be using as your key competitive advantage, then you will have to manufacture in Sri Lanka. What is the nature of business? Is the nature of business pushing you to manufacture in Sri Lanka? Talk about it. That's okay. Competitor entry methods. How have other competitors entered this market? That can be used as a justification, right? For selecting the entry method that you have chosen. Consumer behavior, nationalist sentiment. Sometimes you might decide to export the product from Sri Lanka to India, but then Indians are more nationalist. They are more patriotic. They prefer to buy Indian spices, right? So if that's the case, manufacturing and exporting from Sri Lanka might not be the ideal. So if there are any consumer behavioral factors which can justify the entry method that you have chosen, bring those to the table. Now remember, under task 2, the most important part is the justification. Most students, what they do is they write stories about the entry strategies, the three entry strategies, and then completely neglect the justification. If you don't have a strong justification, you're not going to get marks, right? So spend more words, spend more time and effort on the second part of task 2, which is the justification of the selector entry method. So that's about it on the assignment. So I would want you to, if you have any questions when we meet up in our next couple of sessions, bring them to me, the specific questions that you have, so that we can run through those questions and give you better clarity. So guys, when I started, I said it's important to start the assignment right now. Then you have enough time to fine tune it. So please use your time wisely. And if you have any concerns, any clarity required, please reach out to us. Thank you very much and all the best.